Hi, this is Marc Elias, founder of Democracy Docket. It is Sunday, June 22nd, and this is my weekly update. Well, it may be 2025 for you and me, but Donald Trump is still living in January of 2021. Remember when he threw the insurrection and all in the nation's capital? He posted on Truth Social on Friday that crooked Joe Biden, a man who lost the 2020 presidential election by a quote landslide exclamation point close quote. By the way, all caps, not sure why. Biden was grossly incompetent and the 2020 election was a total fraud. The evidence is massive and overwhelming. A special prosecutor must be appointed. This cannot be allowed to happen again in the United States of America. Let the work begin. Okay, so on one hand, this is just the continued ravings of a madman. On the other hand, this is a post by the President of the United States who has made it clear that he controls the Department of Justice. So when Donald Trump says that there needs to be a special prosecutor, when Donald Trump says, let the work begin, you can be sure that Pam Bondi, his wingman in all things political prosecutions, and Kash Patel at the FBI, who was last seen publishing a book with an enemies list and a children's book in which Donald Trump is the benevolent king. Okay. You could be sure that they will now follow through with exactly what Donald Trump has asked, which is to conduct a bogus, frivolous, wasteful, and intimidating investigation of the aftermath of the 2020 election, the voting that went into the 2020 election, and notwithstanding the fact that over and over and over and over again, it has been determined that Joe Biden won that election fair and square. Joe Biden got more votes. Joe Biden got more electoral votes. Donald Trump lost. Notwithstanding all of that, Donald Trump is now going to force the executive branch into a political witch hunt against his enemies. Now, if that seems like that is just par for the course, it's because it is. We have seen over the course of the last week, and in fact, something I wrote for Democracy Docket on Friday, I gave actually quite a lengthy timeline that shows how many times Donald Trump has now and his administration have now arrested Democrats, intimidated Democrats, called for the arrest of other Democrats. They were at it again this week, of course, when we saw the New York City comptroller and Democratic mayoral candidate Brad Lander was manhandled, dragged, tackled, call it what you want, on video and arrested by ICE officials outside of a courtroom in Manhattan. This is just the latest example of a Democratic elected official who's been detained by the Trump administration during a confrontation with ICE officials. By the way, they are always seemingly in plain clothes. I mean, like, how the hell is Lander even supposed to know that these are police as opposed to just a bunch of people in plain clothes who have decided to tackle and handcuff him? In any event, that wasn't the only instance of intimidation that we saw this week. Trump actually took to Truth Social one time earlier this week on Sunday evening when he told ICE to target, quote, America's largest cities, and specifically called out Los Angeles, Chicago, and New York, all of which are led by elected Democrats. And he said that, quote, these and other cities are the core of the Democrat power base, where they use illegal aliens to expand their voter base and cheat in elections. Everyone, he is telling us what he is doing. He is going after cities because they are, in his words, the power center of the Democratic Party. He is targeting what he believes, even amid a bunch of lies, what he believes to be the political power of the Democratic Party. That is why he is deploying federal resources. That is why he has already deployed and will continue to deploy the National Guard and other military assets. And when you look at what specifically he is complaining about, he is saying that that power base is being used to expand their voter base. He is trying to lay the groundwork starting now for what we will see in 2026 around the midterms, when he and the Republican voter suppression war machine are in full tilt, when the election deniers and those trying to subvert the outcome of elections are at their worst. Donald Trump is building up to that, and both the post on social media on Friday about a special counsel and the post on Sunday a week ago are both examples of him doing that. Okay. In other court news last week, the Supreme Court did a lot of docket clearing, but they are not done. And we're going to talk about that in a second. The one case I want to highlight was out of the Ninth Circuit, however, where the Ninth Circuit said that the district court erred in temporarily blocking the president from doing this. Now, look, that litigation is going to keep going on, but this was a bad decision. This was a bad decision from a variety of perspectives. Obviously, it's a bad decision for the people of Los Angeles. It is a bad decision for democracy. It is a bad decision for anyone who cares about the separation of civilian power and the use of the military, the use of the National Guard. And it's a bad decision, by the way, for all of those conservatives out there who've spent decades telling us about the importance of federalism and states' rights. So it's bad for all of those reasons. But here is the bottom line on it from my standpoint. I wrote a piece for Democracy Docket a few weeks ago, which we'll link in the show notes below, about the presumption of regularity, which is this judicial notion. By the way, it's made up. It's not in the Constitution. It's not in the law. But this notion that judges have adopted, that they assume that when the administration and presidents are doing things, they assume they're doing them for good reasons. They assume that if the president says, I have to do this thing to protect law and order, they start with the presumption that that is correct. If the president asserts certain facts, they assume that those facts are correct. Now, you can overcome that presumption. And that is the task that the pro-democracy lawyers have. But I'm telling you, if we don't get rid of this, if judges continue to assume that Donald Trump is acting in good faith, we are not going to survive with a democracy intact for the next 3.5 years. The judges need to start understanding that Donald Trump is an authoritarian and that the U.S. Constitution cannot be turned into a suicide pact. All right. Let's talk about the week ahead. But before I tell you what's happening in court next week, I need to invite you to a live question and answer session I am hosting for Democracy Docket members on this Tuesday, June 24th at 7 p.m. East Coast time. I'll be answering all of your big top questions about, for example, the arrest of Democratic officials, the state of democracy, what's happening to voting rights in court, what can we expect from the Supreme Court, all of that and much, much more. This event is for Democracy Docket Premium members. So you can get access to that event by becoming a member for $10 a month or $120 a year. Now, look, your membership will help Democracy Docket and its team do the reporting, the case tracking, the analysis, the investigations that you have come to depend on. Plus, you'll get access to this great exclusive event and more like them just like this one. So sign up now at the link above or in the description below, and I look forward to seeing you on Tuesday. All right, now let's talk about what's coming up this week. And most of the action that we're going to be looking for is happening in the U.S. Supreme Court, which sends shivers down my spine just saying that. But on Monday, we will have an order day, which means we won't get opinions, right? We're not going to get the Supreme Court ruling on things. What we're going to get from them are orders. And the big orders we're waiting on is whether or not they are going to take cases for next term or not take cases for next term. So there are a series of these big voting and democracy cases. We will wait to see what we get on Monday. The one that I am particularly waiting on involves a Virginia felony disenfranchisement case. The Virginia Constitution permanently revokes voting rights for people convicted of felonies. An advocacy group and a group of Virginians filed a lawsuit saying that this provision of the state constitution violates the Virginia Readmission Act of 18. That was the Reconstruction era law that allowed Virginia to rejoin Congress after the Civil War. Okay, this is a big case. I think this is a great legal theory, and I think on the merits, the plaintiffs are 100% correct. We will see whether or not the Supreme Court takes this case, and if so, what the Supreme Court ultimately does. But that's not the only thing we're waiting on from the Supreme Court, because they still owe us a series of opinions from this term. And on Thursday, we will get more of those opinions. Now, it is possible that they add another day this week. So make sure you are paying attention and subscribe to Democracy Docket and its free and premium newsletters, because they will keep you up to date on whether or not the Supreme Court adds an additional opinion day. There are still 10 cases left to be decided. So if they don't add another opinion day this week, that could mean we go into next week, which would be really, really a shame. So we are still waiting on some big decisions. The two that I am most closely following are the following. Number one, the big redistricting case out of Louisiana. This is a case about the congressional map. Louisiana had passed a congressional map following the 2020 census. It violated the Voting Rights Act. How do I know? Because a federal court told us that it violated the Voting Rights Act. And the Supreme Court upheld that decision already once before in an interim ruling that went up to the state Supreme Court. The result was that the state of Louisiana had to draw a new map, and that new map included two rather than one Black opportunity districts. That led to the election of two candidates of choice of the Black community in the state of Louisiana. Well, a group of white Louisianans then brought a racial gerrymandering case. This case lost below, but they went to the Supreme Court, and we are waiting on an opinion in that case. This should be an easy one for the Supreme Court. The fact that it has taken it this long, not good news, but don't lose hope. We will see what the Supreme Court does and whether we get that decision this Thursday or at least this week, and don't have to wait for another week if they add another day. The other big democracy case that I am waiting on is the birthright citizenship case, which probably won't address the merits of whether or not Donald Trump's preposterous position is in fact preposterous. Pro tip, it is preposterous, and even this Supreme Court will reject his denial of birthright citizenship. But the issue that is actually before the court here is a different one, a narrower one, but a really important one, which is when and under what circumstances can district court judges issue injunctions that apply nationwide. In other words, if you bring a claim to court and say, I think that this law is unconstitutional, and you win, does it block that law only from applying to you, or does it block that law from applying to everybody? And if everybody, is it everybody just in your judicial district or state, or is it everybody across the country? So that is a question that the Supreme Court is going to rule on. The oral arguments really didn't give us a lot of guideposts about where exactly they were going to land there. There was a lot of mushy middle, so we'll see where that winds up. But you know what? It is not just the Supreme Court that will be active next week. Nope, democracy is on the docket in courthouses all around the country, including in the South Carolina Supreme Court, which will hear arguments over that state's congressional map. The plaintiffs in that case argued that Republican lawmakers deliberately manipulated the state's congressional districts to favor their political party in a partisan gerrymander in violation of the state constitution. Okay, here's the deal. Definitely was a partisan gerrymander, definitely was manipulated. The question is whether the state Supreme Court of South Carolina will do anything about it. And then finally, I'm looking on Wednesday to the full Ninth Circuit when it will rehear a lawsuit brought by pro-voting groups challenging an Arizona law that allowed the county recorders in Arizona to cancel voter registrations upon receiving information that voters were registered in another jurisdiction. This is just another voter suppression law that Arizona passed. This case was punted originally on standing by the Ninth Circuit, and the en banc, in other words, the larger panel representing the full Ninth Circuit, although in the Ninth Circuit it's not actually all the judges, another complicating factor not to bore you with, but the Ninth Circuit en banc will decide whether or not the plaintiffs in that case did have standing. So a big standing decision that is being argued in the Ninth Circuit. Look, I know this is a lot. I mean, I know it's a lot. It's a lot for me. I'm sure it's a lot for all of you to take in. But here's the deal. If you aren't paying attention to what's happening to democracy in court, then you simply aren't paying attention to democracy. And whatever else you may care about that's going on, whatever other issues you may want to prioritize, if you're not prioritizing democracy, then you are missing the key ingredient to the challenges facing our country and the opportunities to make real change in the future. So please take this second to do me two favors. Number one, right in front of you is a little button that says subscribe. And subscribe to this YouTube channel because it's one of the ways we help keep you informed about everything that's happening in court. So hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit the bell to get alerted whenever there are new videos. And number two, click on the link above to become a Democracy Docket subscriber, either to its free newsletters, which are phenomenal and fantastic. They keep you up to date 5 days a week on everything happening in democracy in court. Or if you want more in-depth analysis, become a premium member for $10 a month or $120 a year. And you'll also be able to join that exclusive event on Tuesday at 7 p.m. when I will be answering the Democracy Docket Premium Members community. Thanks. I'll see you next time.